Hello, everyone. Welcome to our environmental interview series with the two main candidates for mayor of Salt Lake City. Today, we are interviewing Rocky Anderson. I'm one of your two hosts. My name is David Garbett. I'm the executive director of O2 Utah. We're focused on cleaning the air, getting action on climate along the Wasatch Front.
And I'm TJ Ellerbeck. I'm the executive director of the Rural Utah Project. We're a nonprofit that focuses on civic engagement and public land conservation issues, mostly across southern Utah.
With that, we want to jump straight into questions. We've got about 9 questions today to cover, and we're trying to do it in a limited amount of time. To kick off things, Rocky, the Community Renewable Energy Program is a coalition of cities here in Utah that are trying to get to 100% clean electricity by 2030. Salt Lake City is one of the key participants of this. Really important program. Right now, it's the biggest thing happening in the state to reduce our carbon emissions. How will you make sure that Salt Lake City is able to meet this goal?
Well, I would want to step up that goal because I don't think there's anything more vital. We can change all the light bulbs there are in the world to LEDs. And if we don't get rid of coal, if we don't end the production of electricity through coal, we're toast. And we've known that for a long time. So I think that House Bill 411 setting up this program, the possibility of communities coming together is a fantastic thing. But, 4 years ago, the city council and Mayor Biskupski had set a 2030 goal for doing this. Then there were a couple of candidates who said, no, we got to move it up. This is so important. We're going to move up the goal to 2023. And then only after those two candidates did that, did the current mayor say, well, yeah, I'm going to go along with that. She basically jumped on that wagon. And then nothing has happened. We're in 2023, we're no closer to the goal than we were 4 years ago. As everybody knows, climate change to me, and I don't like to call it climate change, I only do because that's what most people still know it by. I think it's too innocuous a term for the existential threat that our world and its living inhabitants face. We have got to do everything as quickly as we can. And I would seriously explore setting up a Salt Lake City municipal energy company that is solely provided electricity solely by renewable sources. We can do this if we get behind it. And so I would push Rocky Mountain Power and all the other members of this consortium, which, by the way, is getting smaller and smaller over time with all the delays, because that's the way the bill is set up, that people can opt out. Right now, I believe there's only 17 cities, towns, or counties that are a member of this group. We need to enlarge that group. It would be to the benefit of everybody and certainly would be to the benefit of reducing the threat of climate change. And then we could spread that message. This is what I did when I was mayor. We reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 31% in city operations in 3 years. And a large part of why we were so aggressive is so that we could show that cities can do this. And then we went out around the world presenting to municipal leaders, we could do the same thing here. Imagine if from Utah, more than 17 cities, townships, and counties could come together and we could show we took on the utility, we took on the powers that be. And if we have to start our own electric municipality that's powered solely with renewable power, then we'll do it. We've got to step it up in every possible way when it comes to the climate crisis.
Thanks, Rocky. And you mentioned that several other cities and towns in Utah have left the Community Renewable Energy Program. How would you make sure that Salt Lake City is a leader in making sure no other communities leave the Community Renewable Energy Program?
We have to build a working coalition. And I do this. I know that there's this urban legend driven by the present mayor that I don't work with people. I worked with all sorts of collaborations. I mean, John Huntsman Sr. and I started the Alliance for Unity, all sorts of different leaders in the business, religious, civic, community leaders of all sorts working to solve problems like this. We can do that again. I will reconvene the Alliance for Unity, get these people on board, and then we go to all of these other partners and those who were formerly partners and even those who weren't considering it, and show them the benefits, not only in terms of battling the climate crisis, but the economic benefits and also the energy security benefits of other communities. We can be the leading state when it comes to taking these huge steps forward in terms of combating the climate crisis.
And a quick question on that, Rocky, whether it's the Community Renewable Energy Program or some other negotiation that you're in with Rocky Mountain Power. Previous administrations have used the franchise agreement, which is the permission the city gives rents to Rocky Mountain Power to run power lines through the city on city rights of way. Would you use that as a leverage point to try and get clean energy?
Absolutely, because it's that important to our city. That's a huge negotiating point, and so is the threat of us just forming our own municipal electric utility. And that's been done. There are other municipal utilities. That's not a far out notion. In fact, when we put in the methane recovery at one of the landfills here, that methane was used to produce electricity for that municipal utility. I think it was in Murray. And, there's so many innovative ways to go, and we need to look beyond what's going on in this country to what especially European countries are doing to incentivize everything from photovoltaic panels. I've got 42 of them on my roof. My bill to Rocky Mountain Power almost every month is zero. We have just got to get people off dead center and see the grand possibilities and create an excitement around this. And part of that is in how we would negotiate, including with regard to the franchise agreement that Rocky Mountain Power needs to enter into with Salt Lake City. I don't know why we didn't meet the current mayor's promise of aggressive negotiation that would lead to 100% renewable power by 2023, but we don't have any more time to lose.
Thanks, Rocky. And before we move on to some other important conservation and environmental issues, is there anything else you'd like to bring up as far as your plans for addressing climate change from Salt Lake City?
Yes, actually, when I was mayor, I know there are a lot of younger people who don't remember this, but we were the leading city in terms of combating, we'll call it climate change for these purposes. I still don't like the term as being too innocuous, but we were battling climate crisis on every front. And as I said, before the Winter Olympics, I wanted to make it publicly known and put pressure on both the federal, the state, and other local governments by announcing that Salt Lake City would abide by at least the Kyoto Accord goals, because the United States was one of two countries in the industrialized world at the time that wasn't agreeing with the rest of those nations to the Kyoto Accords to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I made that pledge, and we far exceeded it and way ahead of time, to the point that in our city operations, we reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 31% in just 3 years. And we didn't stop there. We kept at it, doing everything we could, from methane recovery at our wastewater treatment plant, at our landfill. And you all probably know methane has about 21 times the climate crisis impact of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, although it doesn't last as long as in the atmosphere. But we need to educate people. We need to bring everybody together. This is a global problem. Not one city is going to solve it. And that's why I spoke in so many cities, not just around the nation, but around the world, about best practices, about what municipalities can do, and about the successes that we had here in Salt Lake City. And then we went on from there, and to leverage all that, Robert Redford and ICLEI, which is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, and I invited dozens of mayors to Sundance every year for 3 years. And some of them were totally agnostic about the climate crisis. They didn't know anything about it, didn't care about it, and they walked away such advocates for taking every climate protection measure they could. One of them was Mark Begich, who was then mayor of Anchorage, Alaska. He later became a United States senator and became one of the real champions for climate protection. Another one was John Hickenlooper, who was mayor of Denver at the time. He became governor of Colorado. Look at what Colorado has done, especially along the lines of renewable energy and particularly wind power. So this makes such a difference to inspire people with our successes. And they see that they can go home and do the same thing. And it built a really great bond between all of us. In fact, I just got an email a few days before a great friend of mine, who was a mayor at the time, who came out for this event. He just recently passed away, but just a few days before he died, he sent me the most beautiful email about how we were able to join arms and fight this climate protection battle together. So we can do this, but we also need to raise public awareness, because if we don't have the public behind us, no elected official is going to do everything that needs to be done. And this isn't a partisan thing. We've got to get away from that notion that this is somehow different among parties. This is a matter of science, and people are seeing the effects in dramatic ways already, way ahead of what the models used to demonstrate. And I've still got a video that I did many years ago that's available on YouTube. It's had a lot of hits. It explains what happens, how it is the globe is warming, and what greenhouse gases are, and what we can do to reduce them, what Salt Lake City did to reduce them, and the vast difference that it will make if we don't all get behind these kinds of climate protection measures.
Rocky, yeah.
I know.
I was just going to say,
go on. I'm very
thank
enthusiastic
you.
about it.
No, we can tell, and you gave us quite a few different ideas there on the climate front. As TJ mentioned, we want to switch gears for a second. I want to ask you about the Great Salt Lake. Okay. As mayor, what would you do to help maintain a healthy minimum water level in the lake? Which
is probably about 4,200 feet above sea level. And we've got to stick with the goal. We've got to set in the public's mind, that is the goal for saving the Great Salt Lake. And we've got to be really honest. Just as with the climate crisis, we're not going to achieve what we need to do. It's not going to be sufficient to simply change all our light bulbs to LED. It's also not going to be sufficient to engage in residential conservation measures, although when I first became mayor, I illegally ripped out every blade of grass in my front yard and put in drought-tolerant landscaping and forced the council's move toward a more sensible ordinance where we didn't have that 100% turf requirement. But we do need to create a personal and cultural ethic around water conservation. I think that's crucial, but that's not going to be enough. But I do think that it's necessary for all of us to have that ethic so that we can get behind what is absolutely essential, and that is an end to alfalfa farming in Utah. Alfalfa farming uses up about 68% of the water that would otherwise flow to the Great Salt Lake. It's incredibly water intensive. It's absolutely irresponsible to continue with alfalfa farming. And I'm not saying you just take that away from farmers. We provide whatever they need to transition over to low or no water usage for their lands. But alfalfa farming adds about 0.2% to Utah's economy. 1/3 of it is exported to China. It's really such an unnecessary crop for our state. And the people of Iran are actually watching the same dynamic happen with Lake Urim. And so we don't have to feel like we're the only ones facing this ultimate crisis if we don't act now. And their scientific advisors are saying the same thing we all should be saying, and that is we need to prioritize the urgency facing all of our communities throughout this area, and it will be devastating if there is total desiccation, drying up of the Great Salt Lake. Our city is going to be basically toast. There's going to be arsenic in the air. Property values will plummet. We'll lose businesses. People aren't going to be wanting to move here. It will be like, as one person was quoted saying in the New York Times article that seemed to get everybody's attention finally, it will be like a nuclear bomb went off. And that's not an exaggeration. And it's also only 4 or 5 years away. We need to take action now. So we all need to get behind an end to alfalfa farming and allow that 86% of the available water to flow to the Great Salt Lake. It's absolutely essential, but I think to get to that point, we also need to create that personal ethic around water conservation.
Thanks.
And I might also add, it would be a really good idea if they'd stop having the sprinklers on full time at the city and county building when there are major rainstorms. That's not setting a very good example. We need all leadership at every level to walk the walk and set the example for everybody else.
Thanks, Rocky. So America's Red Rock Wilderness Act is a proposal in Congress right now that, if passed, it would preserve more than 8 million acres across Utah as wilderness, which is the highest level of protection the federal government can provide for public land. Would you be willing to endorse America's Red Rock Wilderness Act?
Not only would I be willing to endorse it, and absolutely yes, I was among 3 people who we were all very proud to testify at the only congressional hearing ever on the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. It was first sponsored by our own Wayne Owens, and we were really proud of Representative Owens for doing that. I think it's one of probably the most memorable thing, what I so admired about his service in the United States Congress. And when I went back to testify, there were 2 representatives from Utah's congressional delegation up on the dais. And they sat there and chuckled and whispered to each other. They were very disdainful. But what bothered me the most was 3 members of our congressional delegation were sitting there on the front row to oppose the Red Rock Wilderness Act. It was Senator Bennett, it was Senator Hatch, and it was Representative Matheson, Jim Matheson. And that was so shameful in my view to see any representative in the district from which Wayne Owens held, and granted there's been some gerrymandering, but we have all got to push. I'm telling you, these folks will not do what needs to be done unless we're pushing from the grassroots level. And I took on Representative Bishop. He had lied in an op-ed piece to the people of Utah, saying that at statehood, we had agreed, and the federal government had agreed, that these federal lands would become state lands, and it was exactly the opposite. And I dove in deep on all the documentation and the old Supreme Court opinions. No, at statehood, it was acknowledged that these lands belonged to the people of this nation, that they were federal lands. And we all need to get behind the preservation of these lands. And the longer we wait, the more damage that's going to be done. And some of the damage is permanent. This is always an urgent matter. Just because it's been languishing in Congress all these years, we've got to make sure that it's prioritized. And we do see a lot of support from members of Congress all around the country.
Yeah, so a follow-up on that, how would you like to do that? How would you like to, as mayor of Salt Lake City, help not just with America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, but also protecting public lands? Because I think, I just point out that recently we've seen a number of, many climate scientists step forward and say that in addition to addressing climate change, we need to make a concerted effort to protect lands and waters, and have called for protecting 30% of our nation's lands and waters by 2030. How can you help with that as mayor of Salt Lake City?
Well, a lot of it is public education and getting the public behind it, because if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to get the elected officials to do what they need to do. It's almost always true. It's not true with me, but it's almost always true that people elected to office will lick their finger and hold it up in the air and see which way the winds are blowing. And I read that metaphor once, and it was such a powerful message that we need to be the wind. We need to be the one pushing and pushing. And to do that, we need people to understand the importance it is for every single one of us. You may never hike in the wilderness one step, but the fact that wild lands are there and other public lands are being preserved, we all can see that for all of us and far into the future, we've got an absolute obligation to preserve those lands. We've got a stewardship responsibility. And there was a nationwide campaign by some evangelicals. And I was amazed. I couldn't believe, but it was so powerful because they're looking at what matters to their audience. And they started talking about the biblical obligation we have to preserve God's creation and to look out for the interests of those who come after us. And I think that we need to get our messaging down a lot better. I don't think that the organizations that have taken on these fights have done very good with their messaging, frankly. A lot of it is aimed toward their funding base, I'm afraid, but we need to get that messaging done and elicit the folks who really know the stuff. George Lakoff, who's probably the best messaging person from a neurolinguist point of view. I've talked to him on his own patio. He lives in Berkeley. And I asked he and his wife once, do you know of anything? Can you think of anything more important than getting an effective message that will persuade the American people that we need to get behind these public policy initiatives that will make a real difference with the climate crisis? And the same thing certainly holds true for the preservation of our wild lands and other public lands. And he and his wife thought for a minute and they shook their head and said no, because to get to the changes in policy, you've got to get people behind it. And that's one thing that we forget. I think we sometimes intellectualize it too much, think that it's everybody on top that's going to make the decisions, but it's oftentimes, almost always, what people hear from the grassroots pushing them to do the right thing. And I've been such an advocate on these issues. I've not only in Salt Lake City, I promised Bill McKibben one night in Washington, D.C. I was with him and Tim Flannery, the author of Weather Makers from Australia. And we're talking about the Step It Up events that were going to be held all over the country. And I said, Bill, I promise you, we will have the biggest Step It Up event in the nation. And Step It Up was all about getting Congress to step it up on protecting the climate. And I came back and I said, I made this promise, Bill McKibben, we're going to do this. And we raised the money. We knew that good music brings people together. We had an all-day event. We lined up computers for people to send their letters to our congressional delegation and our state legislators. And we had local bands all day. And then we brought in Los Lobos to play that night. And it was beautiful. They brought me up on the stage and they started doing this drum thing with guitars, and it was all getting the crowd to chant, "Step it up, step it up." Anybody that was there that night would remember that. So everything we do, we just need to keep raising consciousness about how we all need to get behind these public policy changes.
Thanks, Rocky. We have one more topic we want to make sure to ask you about, and that's what will you do to improve air quality in Salt Lake City?
Well, our air quality problems are primarily from two sources, of course, industry and tailpipes. And sometimes it's the combination of what comes out of the tailpipes and what comes out of industry. I think that we need to incentivize in every way right now electric cars. Back when I was mayor, I drove a natural gas car because that was the cleanest car around. I drove that car for 17 years. And I think it set a real example. We had natural gas outlets all over the city, but now you can do it with electric vehicles. We need to make that as easy and convenient and provide all the incentives, even if it's more and more reserved spots for electric vehicles and more charging stations. But we also, I want to hire the best plaintiff's environmental attorney I can find and go through what are the injuries to the public health that we're sustaining both now and that can be expected over the long haul, and what kinds of laws protect us. And it's time to take on these industries that have been cutting short by 2 years on average the lives of people along the Wasatch Front from air pollution. We've got to publicize this. And I have no hesitation. I mean, I would be thrilled to be able to hold these people to account if there's a good faith basis and bring them into court and challenge their practices. MagCorp needs to go. We need to challenge them. They've had a blank check for far too long, and the price has been in the future of this area and in the public health.
Rocky, last question for you. What makes you the best choice of candidates for the environment?
Well, first of all, I have been an enormous advocate. Bill McKibben said once, and we've got him on film saying this, that he said, Rocky Anderson is maybe the best local leader on climate protection in the country. And we were known as that throughout the country and throughout much of the world. I have the passion, I have the knowledge, I have the record of real accomplishment. I would never just say, I'd be embarrassed to say that I spent years as a clean air advocate. That's not enough to advocate. Make a difference. You know, to say that you have good intentions or that you say that you're on the right side is never enough. Start quantifying like we did with greenhouse gas emissions. You know, to be able to tell the rest of the world what we did and what the real world effects were with the kinds of reductions that we achieved. And the same thing certainly goes for our clean air in this community. My advocacy, I teamed up with the Sierra Club to combat the initial legacy highway, and we won. I wasn't actually a party. We lost on standing early on, but everybody saw that the mayor of Salt Lake was standing proudly next to the Sierra Club and another group of people that formed around this issue. And we beat the state on what was an illegal plan, environmentally disastrous, and that evolved into a legal plan, the Legacy Parkway, which is far more environmentally palatable. But I'm against the building of any more roads. I'm on record saying if there's a good faith basis for it, I will stand behind a lawsuit to challenge the expansion of I-15. We're never going to get out of this cycle of sprawl development, more air pollution, more traffic. It's just this vicious cycle that we keep seeing. We've got to stop building new highways, expanding highways, and develop more transit. And I'm on record as doing that. I'm not one that says, I'll shy away from those things just to get a seat at the table. But I'll tell you also that although I may have made some people mad at the time over that, I worked very closely with a lot of people from both parties, a lot of Republicans. I was up twice this last session with the president of the Senate and the legislature. We get along great. He sees that I am the leader that we need at this point in time to clean up the homelessness and affordability crisis, to address those effectively in Salt Lake City. I was up a few days ago with Senator Jerry Stevenson. We have in common that we've been mayors for 2 terms apiece in our cities. And now he's at the legislature. I'm on a very friendly, a personal friendly footing, but we never demonize each other. I have good enough friendly relationships that they understand that's where Rocky is. It's a matter of principle, and he's not going to back down. And when you take that kind of an attitude, you end up achieving a whole lot more negotiating from strength. I won the World Leadership Award from the World Leadership Forum in London for our environmental programs. After 2 years of not giving out the Distinguished Service Award, the Sierra Club awarded me their Distinguished Service Award in San Francisco. The EPA awarded me their Climate Protection Award. They know the difference that we were making here in Salt Lake City under my leadership. We need to restore that kind of national and international leadership on these vital environmental issues. And I will bring that kind of leadership back to Salt Lake City.
Well, with that, Rocky, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good to see you both.
Thank you, Rocky.
Take care.